think we're now ready for our panel discussion, and I've got the honor to introduce our moderator, Danny Reible. Dr. Reible is the Donovan Maddox Distinguished Engineering Chair in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Construction Engineering and the Department of Chemical Engineering at Texas Tech University. In 2013, he joined Texas Tech after 23 years in the Department of Chemical Engineering at the Louisiana State University, and about 10 years in the University of Texas in Austin. He holds a BS in Chemical Engineering from Lamar University and a Master's and Ph.D. in Chemical Engineering from Caltech. Dr. Reible's research career has been focused on understanding the fate and transport of contaminants in the environment, evaluating risks posed by the contaminants, and devising effective measures for risk mitigation. With that, Danny.
So thank you, and for those of you who know me, I am a strong believer in the importance of water, and I think it's central to our discussion of sustainability into the future. And as we look at what Mark described, that even the part of the system that I think most of us would expect to be completely functional and the one that we have to least worry about is one that we also still have to worry about, the infrastructure. We're going to be talking about some other issues at this point, and I'm going to invite a series of colleagues up, but we're going to try to address some of the water issues when we look forward into the future in Texas. That is, what are the challenges we face in providing water of adequate quality and quantity in Texas, and how might we meet that? And I'm going to get the perspectives of people from several sectors. We are facing, for those of you who don't realize it, we are facing a near doubling in population in Texas over the next 50 years. That is at least what's expected. It's going to put enormous strain on our water resources, but failure is not an option. If we cannot provide water of adequate quantity and quality to drive our economy, we will not get that near doubling in population, and we will not have the economy that we would like to see. It's difficult to assess the potential for lost opportunity, the manufacturing facility that doesn't come to Texas because of concerns or water, or an agricultural community that is no longer able to be sustainable as a result of adequate water. So it's extremely important that we satisfy and solve these problems. With that, let me bring up three members of a panel. Michael Weber is a Deputy Director of the Energy Institute at the University of Texas, Director of the Clean Energy Incubator, and the Josey Centennial Fellow in Energy Resources. He's also an author of a book, Thirst for Power, Energy, Water, and Human Survival. I'd also like to bring up Tracy Young, is the Core R&D Program Director for the Consumer and Infrastructure Solutions Division at the Dow Chemical Company. And in this role, she's responsible for leading the innovation portfolio for energy and water, electronic materials, building and construction, coatings, and consumer care. And then finally, I'd like to bring up Ari Michelsen, who is a Regents Fellow and Professor of Agricultural Economics and Center Director at Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Center in El Paso, and has a great deal of understanding of the agricultural water resources issue. And I'm going to invite each of them to make some comments, and I will start with you, Michael, and then go to Tracy, and then to Ari, and then hopefully we'll have some time left for some discussion.
Okay, great. Can I just speak from here? I just got remarks.
You should be able to. Yes.
Okay. I just have spoken remarks, no slides. I figure we might all suffer from death by PowerPoint if we're not careful. So I'll make a couple comments. I have about 40 minutes of remarks is what you told me to prepare. Is that right? I'm just kidding. All right, so a couple quick comments about water supply in Texas. There's a variety of issues. In one set of context I'll try to provide is the idea that water and energy are very interconnected. There are a lot of people in this room who do research on that. And for the most part, the way energy and water are interconnected in Texas right now is a vulnerability for the energy system. And so we have the situation where water can create cascading failures in the power sector or oil and gas. And we had a famous example in Texas in 2011 where we had that freeze. I don't know if you remember that freeze, but it got below freezing for like 30 hours and the state shut down, and people in the Northeast were openly mocking us for not knowing what to do. And one of the things that happened is we had a couple coal plants that have water lines for cooling and water lines for measurement instrumentation and that kind of thing, and a couple of these small lines froze. Because we don't weatherize our power plants in Texas the way they do in colder climates. Like in the Northeast, they'll build a power plant, then build a house around the power plant, but we don't do that in Texas the same way. A couple water lines froze and a couple gigawatts of coal plants tripped offline because of this dependence on water and the water freezing. Well, at the same time, because it was cold, our demand for natural gas was quite high because we use a lot of natural gas for heating in Texas. And because the demand was high for natural gas, the pressures of the pipelines carrying gas were low. And so we had a little trouble getting natural gas to the natural gas power plants that were going to back up the coal plants. And at the same time, where we produce oil and gas, the oil and gas comes up with water, and the water froze. Those are called freeze-offs. And then we couldn't get gas out of the ground to fill those pipelines that were already low because it was cold, because we were heating our homes. And then when the power went out of those two coal plants, it turned off the power for some electric compressors that also put gas into the lines. So we had our natural gas system depending on electricity, which depends on water. And so we had a water problem become an electricity problem, become a gas problem, and then 50 to 60 natural gas plants that tried to come on to back up the coal plants couldn't, and then we had rotating blackouts around the state. So this is the vulnerability where a water problem cascades become a pretty massive energy problem around the state, which has public health implications and other issues. But there might be a better way to think about it, which is design integrated engineering rather than interdependent engineering, where we use the energy water systems to prop each other up rather than bring each other down. In Texas, we have a lot of opportunities for that, especially with oil and gas. Oil and gas produces a lot of water, uses a lot of water, but also produces a lot of water. You heard Mary Lou mention that earlier. And these produced waters are quite significant in volume. In fact, if you look at it by volume, oil and gas companies are really water companies, and they happen to have very valuable byproducts, oil and gas, but they're primarily moving water around, and that water is pretty nasty, but it's in high volume, so we tend to inject a lot of it in Texas, and sometimes you can cause earthquake like that if you're not careful, but you're also just taking water out of the system. If we got oil and gas to become oil, gas, and water companies, and they could treat, reuse, recycle, or make that water available to the supply, it would actually increase statewide supply by 2%. And for a state like Texas, 2% is actually a pretty big number. That's a lot of water. Instead of injecting it, instead of sequestering it, make it available. And so we need advanced techniques, advanced membranes, materials, other things to do that. And this is something that we can do in the oil and gas patch. They're already looking at it. They're taking those steps. We're working with a lot of those companies who have a lot of interest in it. And so that's an opportunity in Texas where we use energy to become a provider of water. In some places, you even have flared natural gas, that you have excess energy at the same place we have excess water. Another opportunity is to use wind and solar, which we have in abundance in Texas, and that wind and solar is in the same location as abundant brackish groundwater that's not too deep and not too salty. And we could use renewables to increase the water supply with renewables integrated with desalination. Desalination is very energy intensive, it's very carbon intensive, but if you do it the right way with low carbon sources and you maybe start with water, it's not so salty, you can increase the water supply that way dramatically. And that also not only solves some water problems, but solves some grid problems. The variability of wind and solar is problematic for grid managers, something they have to think about. And so we might think about having backup natural gas for them or batteries or something. But having water treatment on standby as a flexible load you can ramp up and down when the wind is available is a pretty appealing option. And then these treatment centers can either sell water or electricity depending on whatever price is highest. And they can hedge different markets. So we can use market mechanisms with the resources to get there, using the energy sector again to provide water. We're doing research on that right now for GLO, the General Land Office in Texas, makes a lot of money from oil and gas, and they're starting to ask the question whether they can make money from water as well, and we think the answer is yes. A lot of great research on this topic from UT El Paso, looking at desalination also at Texas Tech. So there's a lot of excellence in the state of Texas on some of these topics. A third one is we could also use the heat from power plants, like thermal power plants, not wind and solar, but coal plants or natural gas combined cycle plants. We can use that heat to preheat water for water treatment. If you're doing reverse osmosis, we use membranes to desalt the water. Having the water be a little bit hot is actually better for throughput and improves your efficiency. And those power plants need a lot of water anyway, and they're heating up that water anyway, so you might as well integrate the system and get some dual efficiencies out of that. We're doing a study on that right now in Texas and also in Kuwait, which is interesting because Kuwait has a massive shortage or scarcity of fresh water. So there are a variety of things we could do to increase supply using our strength, which is our energy sector and all our technical excellence. We could also think about reducing our demand. We consume a lot of water in Texas, mostly for irrigating our lawns. in the municipal sector and then also in agriculture. So we can think about reducing how much we use. And there are a couple ways we can think about reducing our demand for water. One is we could fix our markets to get the prices right. Our water markets are highly dysfunctional in Texas. Actually, they're highly dysfunctional everywhere just about, but in Texas, we're no exception. And so the price for water does not change with supply and demand, which is kind of funny. Like usually with markets, when demand is high and supply is scarce, prices should go up. That does not happen with water in Texas. Our prices are not right, and I would say our prices are too low, or our prices are fixed where your bill for water at your home is based on the pipes, not the amount of water you use. And so you could use 10 times as much water in one month than another, and your price doesn't change. That's an issue. We can also think about integrating new technologies. Mary Lou Hastings mentioned this research she funded earlier. We could switch from coal to natural gas combined cycle, saving carbon and saving water. We can go to water lean devices. We can go to energy lean devices. We can think of having smarter sensors, ubiquitous computing, things like that to track our use. Something like 10 to 40% of drinking water is lost from the treatment plant to the homes, so there's an opportunity there just to reduce waste. And then we can change our mindset. We can get to a culture of conservation where we think of water as a limited resource, not as an infinite resource. And if you look around the globe, water is finite. It doesn't grow or shrink, and we can be more mindful about how we're going to use it. The last comment I'll make, which I think builds off Mark Edwards' comments and others, is just that water is pricey. We probably need to be willing to pay the full price for water, not just in our homes, but for the infrastructure. If you look overall as a nation, the EPA did a gap analysis about a decade ago, concluded that our drinking water systems need about $500 billion of investment, and our wastewater systems need about $500 billion. So that's about $1 trillion of stuff we got to spend to get our water and wastewater infrastructure going the right way. Texas is about 8 to 10% of the national GDP and national population. So you could take that number, divide it by 10. The drinking water number, 500 billion, we need 50 billion in Texas. Well, that's what the Texas legislature came up with a few years ago for the amount of money we need as a state to increase water supply. You divide that out by the Texans, you get to about $2,000 per Texan. Something like, if you add in the wastewater in a household of 3 to 5 people, $10,000 to $20,000 per household. This is real money, and we just have to be willing to invest it. We did about 120 years ago with cast iron that lasts about 120 years. We did another wave of build out about 80 years ago with steel that lasts about 80 years. And then we did another wave of build out about 60 years ago with PVC that lasts 60 years. And so if you've done the math while I was talking, you realize it's all crumbling now at the same time. So there's a wave of investment looming that is a part of all this as well. And I'll stop there.
Tracy.
When you look at it, I think where we started in terms of looming challenge around water, when you look at sustainability, I think it's a good way to think about it. When you look at by 2030, 8.5 billion people, United Nations says we need 30% more water. And then where it's interrelated to food and agriculture, interrelated to energy in terms of water for cooling and production, as well as a lot of energy used in water treatment processes. So it is that interrelated pieces as we look at the global water challenge. When you look at across, industry is about 22% of that water, plus industry looking at economic growth across. Carbon Disclosure Project did a survey of about 823 companies a few years ago, and they found over 62% said water is a key topic at their boardroom level. And driving in terms of when you look at industry and their corporate structure around where plants located, what's the water footprint in terms of their operations, and are they in a region where there's maybe not as much water availability when you look at different drought type of occurrences or quality. Also, when you look at in terms of, in a situation, if there is a quantity effect in terms of a drought-related or quality-related impact, we're going to meet the needs of residents and municipal and people first. Industry is often left looking at what are alternate solutions in a very short time scale, and deciding that you need more water or different quality of water to run industrial processes. At the time you're in a crisis is not the time to be able to look at that. You need time to design the right systems, have the right approaches. And I think when you look at across, it's very healthy dialogue at an industry level looking at how are we looking at long-term sustainability. So I see a lot of the intersection from technology and sustainability across industry where corporate, our plants, our research communities are looking at how does it impact the products that we serve and benefit society from those products, but also how are we looking at our footprint across water and energy and planning out innovations as well as operations that work in a direction that we have the right to continue to operate as well as sustainable operations. One of the things too, I think as we look at some of the comments from Mark as well as Michael to start, water is a global challenge, it's a local solution. One solution in one region is often not the same solution for others. One of the things that we have as a company, Dow Chemical, every decade we commit to sustainability goals. So last year we launched our 2025 sustainability goals. Some of those relate to the products that we serve the market. So we're also looking at products that benefit society and our customers. So we're a water treatment supplier across reverse osmosis membranes, filtration, ion exchange, microbial control solutions. So what are those as we are working with our customers? But we're also looking at our sites. So we have globally what we've identified are 6 key water stress sites, and looking at plans and approaches across those that ensure that we're continuing to sustainability have the water that we need to operate, as well as planning. If you look at across Texas is key for our company. Freeport, Texas, that's roughly 20% of our global production when we look at the chemistries that we supply. 2 other businesses that go into many of the products that you see across: health, consumer solutions, infrastructure solutions, transportation. Really, 96% of products that you use every day are enabled by chemistry. So we're the chemistries that go into those products. And looking at it from a water perspective, as an example, in one of our Netherlands facilities, we have a partnership with municipal water treatment within the region, and we're taking their municipal waste water, and we are treating that to look at how we can use that for running our cooling towers. We also then recycle that and look at some of the other operations, then it finally evaporates. So we reduce some of the demand within that region that allow some of the other municipal, ag, as well as industries. And that's a good solution for that location in Freeport. There's other conservation things we've done along the Brazos River, as well as looking at how we're looking at our reservoirs, how we're looking at some of the treatment, some of the cooling tower in terms of looking at blowdown and being able to recycle that so we take less fresh water directly, and taking impaired water that is maybe a little bit more salty and saline, treating that with membranes, and then being able to use that for operations. All of those collectively are individual solutions as an example.
Slides up.
Yes. Could you put his slides up?
Hi, my name is Ari Michelsen. I'm obviously with Texas A&M, actually in El Paso, though. We're closer to San Diego than we are the other side of Texas. So when I think of, do I want to go to College Station or San Diego? It can be a tough choice. I'm going to be talking about the Texas future water needs and building a sustainable future. The photo that you see there is the mighty Rio Grande River when there's actually water in it. Most of the year, it's completely dry. And those are the Franklin Mountains behind there. Let's see, do I have the... There we go. As you're all aware, Texas has a wide range of climate. And to the far left, you see El Paso in the desert, Chihuahuan Desert. We get 8 inches of precipitation, versus you look at the far right, Beaumont, between 40 and 50 inches of precipitation. So there are a lot of water needs and methods for managing it. We also have river basins, but you notice they're all towards the east side of Texas. And that's both important in terms of management, but how you manage it. The river authorities, there are many levels of jurisdictions in water resources management. Texas relies on aquifers for much of its water resources and is expected to increase its use of aquifers. Many of these, particularly in West Texas, are not recharging. So we're mining the aquifers as we use them. As I mentioned, there are lots of different authorities with jurisdiction over water resources. And you need to work across these jurisdictions when you're planning and looking at future water supplies. Texas is unique in that we have been developing each 5 years a 50-year water plan with planning for the drought of record, which had been the 1950s, and now is 2011 is the drought of record for much of the state. There are 16 regional water planning groups, so 16 different plans go into the state plan. And many people volunteer their time to help develop this for the Water Development Board. Population growth is one of the biggest drivers in terms of water demand. And we see both in the orange coming up to the present and in the purple projecting out, and we're actually looking at 50 million as we look at 2060 now. This has been updated. But how do we meet those additional water demands? Do we have extra water right now? Most regions will say no. And here's just a graphic image of where that growth is supposed to occur. And as usual, you see the I-10 corridor and then way out in El Paso. So how much water are we using? Because we need to look at effective water use, conservation programs. Dallas, oh man. And that's in a wet area. El Paso, almost half of that. In the desert, the national average is 160 gallons per person per day. When you look at projected water supplies available for Texas, it's not increasing, it's declining because we're mining our aquifers. And this means we'll have fewer or less water resources available in the future. So when you combine these and look at the water demand projections, I'm sorry, this isn't combined, the water demand projections, you can see the red line coming up is municipal and the bluish green line going down. We're going to be taking water out of irrigated agriculture, which is one of the biggest sectors of our economy. Well, what does this look like by sector or category of use between now and the future in 2070? And the pink shows the water needs that are met by the state water plan, in other words, available water resources, and the red are the projected demands if we were to try to meet all demands. And you can see irrigation on the far right, far left, I'm sorry, on this. We're not going to be able to meet those demands. This is going to change our economy in Texas dramatically as it shifts from irrigated agriculture to municipal use. So among the ways of meeting those unmet demands is to build new reservoirs, but they're very expensive and they're environmentally difficult to get approved. But these are some of the sites that are recommended for meeting those. There are also groundwater and surface water transfer projects proposed. Well, if you're the region receiving the water, that sounds great. If you're the region that water is being taken from, you get politically upset. So this is going to be a real challenge. As I mentioned, we're turning to groundwater as surface water supplies from climate variability and climate change decrease surface flows. So what will it take to meet the future water demands? The cost from the 2017 State Water Plan show that it would take $63 billion to implement the strategies or the projects to meet future water demands. And this is $8 billion more than the plan from 2012. And this is done every 5 years. It's not going down and the population's going up. Where is this money going to come from? Well, the sponsors, in other words, the managers of water, need at least $36 billion of just capital costs and assistance. Thus, the state legislature created the SWIFT program. Now, a lot of people thought, oh, this is a grant program. It'll solve our problems. No, it's loan assistance, which means the municipalities and the others developing these projects borrow the money, and you, as water users, need to pay this back. So we're still talking about $63 billion additional. So the capital cost by user group, you can see the top half is municipal, the lower, almost 30%, 40% is also municipal, because those are wholesale providers that supply it to the cities. Well, we need to look at what projects should be built and what are the most economical. And if you look towards the axis on the left, municipal conservation is the most cost-effective measure. And this logically features predominantly in each of the 16 regional plans. Then you move to surface water desalination, and that's still expensive. You're moving from about $1 per 1,000 gallons to $5 to $6 per 1,000 gallons. And then you move all the way over to the right along the Gulf Coast to seawater desalination. Very expensive. So what happens if we don't implement these plans? Well, it was estimated in 2012 that the state would have $116 billion in lost income by 2060. Business taxes would be $1 billion less. State and local, at $10 billion less, and lost jobs of 1 million jobs by 2060. So these are major impacts to the economy and how Texas functions and operates. So we need to consider the economic issues of do the economic benefits of the state water plan strategies to provide full supplies, can they be met? How do they compare in cost? And these supplies, because they're based on meeting drought of record, will be surplus in many other years. Can the state afford, and is it willing to provide almost $27 billion? And then the users need to provide another $36 billion. So is this going to come through increases in taxes or water rates? Has to be one or the other. It's not free. So to conclude here, we also have, as was noted, aging infrastructure. Nationally, an estimated $1 trillion will be required by 2035 just to maintain our drinking water systems. Compliance costs are going to increase the costs that I've cited. The interdependency between energy and chemical costs to treat water, and the increased security costs, particularly after the experience of 9/11. There are much higher costs being implemented to provide water security. So we're looking at all of these at the same time. We need to look at the willingness to pay of consumers. How much are they going to conserve? If your bill is going to double, are you going to say, well, maybe I will use less? That's most likely what will happen. But right now, all of these projects are in the state mix and will be going to the state legislature for approval. So I think that's, and this just shows some relative costs across the western U.S. This is the desalination plant. Is Senator Hutchinson still here? Oh, okay. This is the K. Bailey Hutchinson desalination plant. It's the largest inland desalination plant in the world, and it's in El Paso. And there's just a comparison of cost by source. Groundwater's the cheapest, importing water from other regions the most expensive.
Okay, with that, we've got, thank you, Ari, that we have some time for some questions and some discussion. We don't have much time. I am mindful of the fact that my boss is part of the panel discussion at lunch, so we're not going to hinge into that too much. But if there are some questions, please.
My question is, if the projected investments are not made, is anybody seriously modeling what will happen to the state? Will the population decrease? One should take a realistic perspective about what might happen rather than the most optimistic.
Yes, it is projected that the population would not increase as much. People would actually leave the state rather than come to it.
Quick another comment on that real quick is there might not be public money for it, meaning from bonds or tax, that kind of thing, but there might be private equity money for it. In fact, there's been a trend nationwide, or perhaps even globally, for more private equity money to take care of infrastructure needs. water, wastewater, rail, roads, things that private equity never would have touched a decade ago, but is now very intrigued by it. New York Times had a great series on this just like 2 weeks ago, talking about the way private equity is filling in the infrastructure gaps that we've decided we're not going to pay for in like an anti-tax mood as a nation. So we don't want to tax ourselves to pay for it. We pay for it through user fees and other ways instead. So
Yeah.
the money might still be there. It just might be through different means.
Yeah.
And then if it's not there, we'll depopulate it or something.
Yeah, you still have to pay for it one way or the other.
From a private industry perspective as well, I mean, companies are looking at enterprise risk management in terms of, what's the water availability, quality, quantity, what are their contingency plans across. You see that more and more increasing over the last few years. Post-drought, people want to have plans in place. I see that in a number of areas.
Next question.
Thank you. We've all read the figures on how much more water it takes to get nourishment from animal protein, especially cows, than plants. So agriculturally, how does the water usage fit into this in Texas now? And most of it's agricultural, and how much is for cattle ranching?
About 80% on average across Texas is used in agriculture. Most of it's for crops. Cattle certainly do use some. But for example, an acre of alfalfa, fully irrigated, will take 4 acre-feet, which just means, if you can imagine, an acre filled 4 feet high with water.
But is that counted in, the alfalfa is counted into?
No,
Yeah,
no, that's separate.
A lot of that irrigation is for feed for livestock. The livestock number is very small by direct accounting, but by indirect full life cycle accounting, it'd be much, much bigger.
Yeah.
Do you know the number?
I do have those numbers for carbon and water in a paper. I can't remember them, but it's pretty significant. So, because you need, however many acres of grain per cattle, per head, that kind of thing.
Right.
So those numbers exist. I don't have them right now.
Era, you showed a very dramatic drop in one slide in water for irrigation and agriculture. And was that an incremental change, or was there actually going to be an 80% reduction in irrigation in Texas? It went from 3.5 million, I believe, down to less than 1.
Well, if the markets work efficiently, that water will be transferred out of agricultural irrigation to municipal and industrial use. But it's not always in the same location, and water is very expensive to transport. It's heavy.
I guess I appreciate your comments as well on that. It is true that our largest water user is probably its lowest value use.
Yes. And that's true throughout the U.S., but in part it's they're on, well, I'm going to wave my hand like an economist. They're on the lower end of the demand curve, but they're also the ones that first came here and developed the water throughout the western United States. So they own water rights in most cases that are priority over other users. So when cities want water or environmental groups want water for in-stream flows, they go to the farmers to buy those water rights.
Sounds like we're back to that functioning water market. David.
I'm a water faculty member at the University of Texas at Austin, and the single scariest moment of my 36 years in the faculty came in the spring of 2012. Ari mentioned that the 2011 drought is now our drought of record. In the spring of 2012, ERCOT, which is the Electricity Supply Authority of Texas, was warning us that we could have rolling blackouts in the state, that our electricity system could go down. We have about 110 electricity generating plants, and they're in a isolated system that we can't get power from the rest of the country. And about 10 of those had enough dependence on water supply and water temperature that they could fail. And if that happened, we would have had rolling blackouts in our state. And I hadn't appreciated that our water and electricity systems could go down at the same time. Yeah. And I wonder if you could comment on that, Michael or others.
Sure, yeah, great comment. And I was in the room with you, I think, when you had that realization. We were there at the same meeting. We're like, holy cow. And my group does a lot of research on that. There are a variety of things you can do to reduce the dependence of the power sector on water. Water is a very good coolant and improves the efficiency and operation of power plants. And if that water is not available with the right abundance, right temperature, it degrades the operation of the power plants, sometimes force the power plants to turn off. And there's an example of a heat wave in France in 2003 where the heat wave killed like 15,000 people in France, about 70,000 people across Europe, and the water got too hot, so nuclear power plants had to dial back because they couldn't get the cooling water. In Texas, you could have that risk from heat waves or droughts where the water is not available or available at the wrong temperature. And the way you can fix that is by switching the cooling system to like air cooling systems or dry cooling systems, like your car radiator uses air for cooling it. That is not as efficient, it is more expensive. So it would be bad for other reasons, but good from a water reliability perspective. You could also switch from the thirstiest kinds of power plants that were built, say, in the 60s and 70s without water scarcity in mind, build some with more efficient cooling systems that require less water. Or you can go to fuels that need less water, like natural gas, combined cycle power plants that are very new and very efficient, use like half the water of a traditional coal plant. And then some of the renewables like wind and solar don't need water at all. Some renewables like biofuels and geothermal do need a lot of water, but some of them are very water lean. So we could contemplate adding water in as one of the metrics for power plants, not just their emissions, but also their water intensity, and design a fleet that's leaner overall, and that reduces the vulnerability.
Yeah, but from an economic standpoint, you need to consider all of the resources. So water is just one of them, whether it's natural gas, the technology that's used. You need to look at the economics of the combination of those things. And then as you build systems that have backup, for example, you usually use water, but you can switch to air-cooled. That increases the cost because you've basically got a redundant system that's sitting there idle much of the time. So I'm president of the American Water, or past president of the American Water Resources Association. We've done a lot of work on the energy-water nexus and looking at integrated water resources management. We don't manage water for water's sake. We manage it for the services, and those services can be a full range.
Let's have one final comment. I'd like you to respond to a throwaway line I often use, is that we don't actually value water. We give it a lot of lip service. We say it's important to us, but we don't actually value water. I think your slide showed that we could have as much water as we want, that is desalinating the ocean, if we're willing to pay $2,000 an acre foot or $6 1,000 gallons, roughly. I would suggest that that would be quite viable for municipalities, probably industry, but probably not agriculture.
Well, and I had some other slides that showed recreation. We value recreation, whitewater rafting, fishing, wildlife, but rarely do you see a dollar put down, and economists call those non-market values, and they are important.
Okay. Anyone else care to comment?
I think you nailed it. If there's one thing we should fix, is probably to get functional water markets. Just returning to that comment you made earlier, and I also mentioned just that the price is messed up, and when the price is messed up, we tend to have weird behaviors. If the price is too cheap, we tend to waste it. We tend to be really mindful of things that are expensive, but we tend to be profligate with things that are cheap. And so getting the price of water, not necessarily be more expensive, but to more accurately reflect the availability of the resource is where we need to go.
And I'll add to the comment. I was at the America Water Summit last fall. So you've got a combination of mayors, different folks across municipalities that are running, some of the largest water treatment facilities across the U.S., CEO, vice president level across a lot of the water treatment community. And I could tell you, being in the water and energy industry for the last 10 years specifically, really the first time that I would say the main theme for the conference was really around public-private partnerships. How do we look at waters from an infrastructure standpoint and looking beyond just today, but really that piece around resiliency and reliability, depending upon what type of source, right? There's different costs, desalination, pulling from groundwater, reusing kind of water, that really are a local kind of solution, but how do you look at that local entity, public and private, looking more broadly around what is all the industries, ag, residential pull, what type of water quality, and how do we look at that a little bit more collectively in some of the plans?
Well, with that, I'll pull the panel session to a close and invite you to close out this morning.
Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you so much, all you panelists. We really appreciate your insights. Let's give them a round of applause.